Well, back to UK politics. Um, but unfortunately, as I've said before, because of Trump, his entirely unpredictable nature, the tariffs, what could go on in Ukraine, his foreign policy direction of what he may decide to pursue, the fact that you've had the threat from Trump's trade chief, go with us or else you'll be hit with tariffs, meaning we could suddenly be hit with maybe even more percentage of tariffs. Um, I've said before the UK does not want to get involved in a trade war between the US and the EU. You've had business leaders in the UK today come out to urge Starmer get as close to the EU as you can. And I want to remind people the whole reason the UK joined what was at the beginnings of the of the EU, back in the 70s, was because of British businesses saying, yeah, we want in that. We need to be a part of Europe. We need to be, in that club. And yet you've got British businesses today, once again, pretty much saying, yeah, we want you to be as close to Europe as possible. History has a bizarre way of repeating itself. But today, we are going to sort of have a look at the delusion that is still going on in the Conservative Party, because, oh boy, do these delusions run very, very high indeed. Now, to start with, let's say this. The next election is probably going to be maybe 2029, maybe early 2030. We don't know at this moment in time, but it's probably going to be around about 2029. But to try and make predictions is impossible. Labour have been in power 2 months. The sky hasn't fallen. They haven't created an economic disaster, this a la Liz Truss. They are trying to solve all this economic mess that's been left by these previous Conservative governments, by their actions, by their policy. And I will say this now: Rachel Reeves and the rest of the Labour team have a very, very hard task. A very hard task. And as we've heard before from a lot of reports, Reeves is now running around trying to find where she can achieve that growth. But meanwhile, if you're looking for that growth, it's in Europe. UK businesses are all saying it. You want that growth, it's in Europe. Now, there are a couple of other things that we could do. That's for sure. And we need to start having a look at, making sure that, UK companies don't start running to America, because one of the things I definitely have noticed, a lot of UK YouTubers like to talk about news and things like that. We have really not talked about, and I think we should talk about a lot more, to be honest. The effects, of course, of the Inflation Reduction Act and, of course, the CHIPS Act is having not just on the UK and businesses here, but also in the EU as well, because the EU having to look at making its own package of the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, etc. On that. But that is something that we should do. I think we should follow Japan by building our own nationalized chip production factory. I think that would be a fantastic idea, because guess what? It would cost exactly the same amount that Rishi Sunak put out all those subsidies for chip companies in America, in the UK, to try and get them to stay because of the Chip Act in America, which they've pretty much all laughed at and just said that's nothing compared to what is available in America. But for that exact same price, we could build a nationalized chip production factory here in the UK. I think that is something Labour should pursue. But another time, another discussion for another time. Like I say, we're here talking about some conservative delusion here. Like I say, the next election, wild way off. But here, instantly, we have, of course, from the home of delusion, from Conservative Home, they polled their members and said, well, what do you think is going to look like in the next election? If anyone ever asked that question to me, I would say it very clearly. It is too early to know. You have no idea what could happen in the next election because you don't know what events and things could happen over the next couple of years. Remember, in 2019, the Conservatives were talking about a decade or if not or more of being permanently in power. Look what happened from 2019. You know? So it is really impossible to make those long-term, I think, predictions. But this saying, oh, there's going to be a conservative majority. Well, okay, a conservative majority of what? It, you know, um, I don't think it's gonna have to happen. It's not gonna happen like that. Um, like 38% of members are saying on here from their thing that you are looking at a conservative majority. You know, that is what they've said here. Whereas, meanwhile, they're all very optimistically hoping that there's going to be a 14% chance of a Labour majority. Bear in mind, they've barely been in government for a couple of months, and yet the sky has not fallen. Things are still ticking over, and their entire internal party is in a mess because it goes on down to talk about this. You know, will Kimmy Badenoch lead the Conservative Party into the next election? The first response, Kimmy Badenoch will definitely lead the party into the next general election at 31%. Meanwhile, the more probable likely outcome is that Kimmy Badenoch will probably lead the Conservative Party to the next general election at 48%. Meanwhile, of course, you have Kimmy Badenoch's popularity ratings first came out today. She is more unpopular than Keir Starmer. And bear in mind, she's had her first two bites of the apple of PMQs, haven't really gone over well. Once again, the Conservatives are not breaking through with any of their messages because they have not gone onto policy. And I will keep on saying this. The second Kimmy Badenoch actually starts to say, this is the policy we are going to go for, that is when she will run into trouble. That is when she will start to have problems. That is when you will see these infighting start to break out again. Because you've got to give Kimmy Badenoch, I would say, between a year or two. If she has not turned the party fortunes around in that time, which already looking like she hasn't, she is in trouble. She is in monumental trouble. And many people here even know it. So someone instantly says, it appears to be a very long bet and an assumption that it will all go right for the Tories and all wrong for Labour. And that is exactly what have gone on here. Exactly. It is an incredibly long bet that everything is going to go absolutely wrong for Labour. Now, will a party do things wrong? Of course they will. You know, of course things are going to wrong for any government. It's inevitable things will go wrong. But the real test of a government, as we've always said, is what do they do when there is a crisis or a problem? How do they go about solving it? And fundamentally, the Labour government that we have now is fundamentally different, wired differently to tackle and solve problems. So someone else said here, okay, all the odds are pretty phenomenally long for us to return to power at the next election. So even they are very, very, very much knowing of that, knowing full well what a massively, phenomenally long bet that will be. And bear in mind, a lot of them are going, oh, but Starmer did it. Starmer did it. Is Kimmy Badenoch doing any of the type of stuff that Starmer did when he got into power? No. So far, she has sat and pretty much not done a lot, except appoint a shadow cabinet that is incredibly loyal to her. Like, predominantly, the people in the shadow cabinet overwhelmingly loyal to her. Gee, that's not going to cause any problems in the future, is it? Oh. Someone else said here, it's very clear that the right is split and needs to be resolved as a matter of urgency for anyone to win other than the quote ghastly socialist. That should be the priority, not trying to slug it out while the country goes down the toilet. And they are right. How is Bad not going to tackle that? How are they going to tackle that split? When you've had a couple of by-elections very recently where conservatives have been denied winning by reform, and instead the Lib Dems and Labour have won the seats instead. And that's only a couple of recent local council by-elections, which, bear in mind, have a very low turnout. So it is hard to really say, is that going to be the real message going forward? But it is very clear where the Conservatives have lost, or they've maintained, or the other parties have maintained a hold, is because of that right-wing vote split again. So, yeah, someone else here points out to elect a Conservative government would be, of course, be paralyzed by its own wets from enacting now Conservative legislation as happened in 2010 and 2024. It would be a complete wasted vote. So still, there is that whole point in the party where they are going to reject that. And then someone else said, Thea, all bets are completely off when Trump takes office and starts to impose tariffs on British goods. Unless Labour accepts what them to be will be pretty much unacceptable concessions for what then for Rachel Reeves is now already in trouble over her CV whoppers as her budget now unravels even further. It hasn't really unraveled at all. That's the right wing spin. If Trump, of course, vetoes the Chargo sellout, and of course, what price David of Labour's Lammy's job, and of course, the net zero would gradually implode internationally. Net zero hasn't imploded at all. That is a load of right-wing tosh. And of course, that is, of course, not factoring in the distinct possibility of a really nasty war over Ukraine and, of course, the Middle East or even Taiwan. Are we now content? Now, the very uncomfortable truth that we have a very mediocre government, more used to indulging in student politics than real-world governance. Again, someone who reads a right-wing newspaper there as well. A civil service blob that acts with its own interest. Again, a very right-wing blob, very right-wing fundamentalist there. We're, of course, caught up now in the cat's cradle of socialist EU-era legislation that makes a now significant government impossible without lefty lawyers sticking their nose in. Yeah, not very going to happy at all. Someone else says here, oh, that's me. The Tories lost because they completely alienated everyone and became unfit for office. Labour won not because they were popular, but because voters want them and want not only them, but anyone but the Conservatives. Again, very true. Very, very true on that. Yeah, someone says nobody can expect such a turnaround. You actually need to make it happen. The thing is, once Badnock, I've said this, once Badnock actually starts to implement policies, starts to say this is the policy we are going to go, zoom, infighting starts again almost immediately. Immediately, it starts again. Yeah. Someone else says here, hot on the heels of the American pollsters getting the presidential election wrong, here we are again with more pointless polls for the UK. Starmer got off to a very wobbly start as a PM, with his inexperience now showing over his expenses allowance. But he is not really, quote, settled yet into his role. There are still a few points to be made, of course, about Starmer. He is first sensibly ignoring all that fuss made about his expensive allowance and got on with the job. He is tough. Anyone who's been a director of public prosecutions would be. Second, he is now concentrating his energies on getting round world leaders and world capitalists making contracts, trying to make good a very good impression of the stability of British politics after a whole series of chaotic Conservative MPs. Again, very true. That mounts for a lot, showing that there's stability in British politics. Thirdly, and his most important role, is, of course, for the UK, that he continues to speak slowly and clearly and with some deliberation. This partly comes from his background as a lawyer, but it makes a change from the sort of hurried banter and, of course, with too many jokes that we've now come to expect from the Conservative Party leaders. Of course, in the Haig/Johnson mold, too many jokes are now the curse of the modern Tory party, because no one knows what else is now said in earnest or what is said in jest. Again, really right on that one. Someone else said here, luckily the Tories will never win under Kemi. Pretty much true on that. I don't know if we need any more, but I think you get the point here that, they've come out of this, and here you have, once again, a very, very clear point that there is a lot of delusion. There's still a lot of infighting, backbiting, annoyance. What policies can we ban not going to go for? What is she going to sort of strike with? What is she going to go with? You know, Starmer, of course, and co have taken a lot of tacking in the last couple of weeks, and I agree. Not everything in the budget was, absolutely fantastic and amazing. I think it was a very, sensible, safe, and sane budget, which I think is what they really wanted to do. I think, of course, the big task is really what will come next after all this. When we get next year, a lot of the other stuff, a lot of the other sort of policies, where will start to see Labour policies really start to kick in over the next year. He's still brand new, pretty much. He's fresh out of the box. But the sky is not falling. The budget, if you look at focus groups, largely went down pretty all right. So he's doing better, of course, than the right-wing press will give him credit for, or even say that he's doing. But that's just where we are in our own media landscape. But of course, as always, like I say, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.